Hey there, welcome to our talk on the 12 most contaminated fruits and vegetables you might want to think twice about before tossing them into your grocery cart. Now, I'm not saying you have to avoid these foods at all costs. In fact, these items can still be healthy when properly sourced, washed, and prepared. But let's face it, the grocery shopping experience can be a headache when you start looking at pesticide concerns, recall notices, and all those big scientific words none of us can pronounce without sounding like we're from another planet. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into all of that, from the perspective of actual shoppers who've had some pretty interesting and sometimes gross experiences, as well as experts who have done the legwork in their labs. To kick things off, let's set the stage. In the United States, the Department of Agriculture, USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration periodically test a wide range of fresh produce items to monitor pesticide residues. Based on that data, independent organizations like the Environmental Working Group, EWG, compile lists such as the Dirty Dozen, which rank the produce with the highest average pesticide residues. Environmental toxicologists and advocacy groups pay close attention to these findings, given concerns about the cumulative effects of pesticides on human health, especially in children, pregnant women, the elderly, or individuals with compromised immune systems. Now, one of the reasons I personally care about this topic is the sheer number of times I've heard people say, "I've been eating fruit since I was a kid, and I never had problems," or "My grandparents ate non-organic produce, and they lived until they were 90. That's fair enough. But the agricultural landscape has changed a lot over the decades, including how pesticides and fungicides are used. Also, new farming methods, new chemicals, and changing environmental factors can create new concerns. By pointing out this list of fruits and vegetables that typically rank high for contamination, we can hopefully motivate you to be more vigilant. Maybe you'll want to invest in organic versions of these items, or at least wash and prepare them more carefully. Before we jump into the details, let me say this. These foods are still loaded with vitamins, minerals, fiber, and other good stuff for your body. It's not about demonizing them or telling you to ban them entirely. It's more about awareness. If you know that a certain fruit tends to have a high pesticide load, maybe it's worth paying that extra dollar for an organic version, assuming that's an option for you. Or maybe you'll want to soak that produce in a vinegar solution for 15 to 20 minutes before eating it. Our job here is simply to inform. Your job is to decide how you want to respond to this information. So, let's explore those 12 most notorious items, referencing data from the EWG, comments from fellow grocery shoppers, and insights from health professionals who keep an eye on pesticide exposure. And because I know people love hearing real-life stories, I've compiled a few experiences from folks who have encountered issues with these foods. Remember, these experiences are anecdotal. What happens to one person might not happen to everyone, but they add some flavor to the discussion. Strawberries often top the EWG's Dirty Dozen list, and for good reason. They're delicious, sweet, and bright red. Exactly what you'd want to see in a dessert garnish or fruit salad. But strawberries also have a high surface area relative to their volume, combined with a porous surface that makes it easier for pesticides, fungicides, and other chemicals to stick around. Pesticide Action Network, PAN, suggests that commercial strawberries can be treated with dozens of different pesticides during their journey from seed to store shelf. One shopper I spoke with, Becky from California, said, "I used to buy strawberries every week. Then I started noticing a bitter chemical aftertaste, even after rinsing them thoroughly. I switched to organic, and I haven't tasted that weird bitterness since." There's no scientific data that says you'll always be able to taste the pesticides, but Becky's experience resonates with the fact that conventional strawberries can have multiple types of residues. And there are also reports in consumer forums about discovering mold more quickly in heavily sprayed strawberries, or having unexpected allergic-like reactions after consumption. Experts often recommend buying organic strawberries if you can, or at the very least giving them a thorough wash. In some cases, people even hull them and soak them before use. Spinach is a leafy green that's widely recognized for its nutritional benefits. It's loaded with iron, vitamins, and that famous folate. Popeye wasn't joking around when he made it his go-to source of strength, though I'm pretty sure he didn't worry about pesticides while popping open his cans. According to one USDA pesticide data program test, spinach samples often show residue of permethrin, a pesticide that's considered somewhat controversial in large doses. The EWG points out that spinach is regularly near the top of the contamination list, partly because of how it's grown in large-scale agriculture and the vulnerability of its leaves to pests. If you've ever noticed a chalky or sandy texture when rinsing spinach, you're not alone. Chloe from Seattle recalls, "I once bought a bag of pre-washed spinach. Even though it said triple washed, I found grit and odd specks inside. I rinse my spinach an extra time now, and occasionally I see bubbles form if I let it soak, which is creepy." While there are no authoritative studies that say a bubble or two indicates pesticide residue, caution never hurts. Nutritionists often advise, if you want the best out of spinach without a side of chemical cocktails, consider organic or locally grown, and definitely give those leaves a thorough wash. Kale, along with collard greens and mustard greens, has garnered a lot of attention in the past few years because of its superfood status. It's rich in antioxidants, fiber, and vitamins. But guess what? It's also prone to heavy pesticide use, especially when grown in large monoculture fields. There was a test result a while back that cited kale having residues of a certain pesticide that's been banned in other countries due to potential health risks. One particular brand of bagged kale was even flagged for elevated residues, prompting several consumer advocates to question the brand's labeling and marketing. That brand was quick to respond that the levels were within regulatory limits, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. Amanda from Texas shared, "I tried to do a kale smoothie diet for a week. I broke out in this weird rash, and my doctor suggested I might have been reacting to something on the leaves. Once I switched to organic kale, I never had that problem again." Again, anecdotal, but it lines up with the broader message that if you're consuming a lot of these leafy greens, residue buildup can be a concern. The EWG also lumps collard greens and mustard greens in this category, so if you're a big fan of those, keep your eyes open. Nectarines, peaches, and other stone fruits are next up in the contamination conversation. Let's focus on nectarines for a moment. They have thin skin, which means pesticides can penetrate more easily than in thick-skinned fruits. They also bruise easily, which sometimes encourages farmers to apply fungicides to prevent rot while shipping them across the country. A 2019 study by the USDA found multiple pesticide residues on conventional nectarines. One shopper, James from Florida, claimed that he once bit into a conventional nectarine and immediately felt an odd tingling on his tongue, though doctors couldn't pinpoint if it was pesticide residue or just the start of an allergic reaction. Experts say it's probably rare to notice pesticide residue in that way, but that doesn't mean residue isn't there. EWG data typically show that peaches and nectarines often end up with multiple detectable pesticides. So if you're concerned, organic or locally sourced orchard fruit may be a better choice. Apples are a staple fruit in many households, from that classic lunchbox staple to pies and sauces. Yet apples are frequently treated with pesticides and fungicides, especially post-harvest. There's a real debate around whether you should peel them or not, since a big portion of their fiber and nutrients is in the skin. A horticulturist friend of mine once told me, "You can wash apples well, but certain waxes and pesticide solutions are designed to be water-resistant, so even a good rinse might not remove everything." Carla from New York shared her story. "I'd buy these shiny, perfect-looking apples. I'd wash them, wipe them, polish them, but they still had this film on them. I started buying apples from a local orchard, which weren't as shiny and had a few spots, but they tasted a lot better, and I felt safer about them." Multiple studies have shown that apples often come with traces of diphenylamine, a chemical applied post-harvest to prevent browning and scalding. It's been banned in the European Union in high concentrations, but it's still permitted in the US, so if you're sensitive or wary, it's worth noting that conventional apples can carry these residues. Grapes are next on the list. Whether you enjoy them fresh or prefer them in wine form, you should know that grapes can be subjected to a number of pesticides and fungicides during the growing process. This is partly because grapes grow in clusters that are highly attractive to insects and fungi. When you look at a cluster of grapes, each grape is like its own little pesticide sponge. A lot of consumers mention the white, dusty appearance known as the bloom, which is a natural protective coating. The trouble is, you don't know if you're looking at the harmless bloom or pesticide residue that settled on the skin. John from Illinois described an experience with some grapes he bought on sale. They looked fine at first, but when I rinsed them, the water turned slightly milky. My wife was grossed out and refused to eat them. We ended up throwing them away. Now we usually go for organic grapes, and we don't see that same issue. Again, not a formal scientific test, but definitely an example that resonates with many conscientious shoppers. Experts advise washing grapes thoroughly under running water for at least 30 seconds, and if you're particularly cautious, you can soak them in a vinegar water solution. Cherries are one of my personal favorites. They're sweet, they're tart, and they're perfect for desserts or just snacking. But they also rank high in pesticide residues. In some EWG reports, cherries have shown traces of substances that are banned in other countries. Commercial farmers often rely on multiple sprays throughout the growing season to protect against everything from fruit flies to fungal issues. Lauren from Massachusetts wrote on a consumer forum, "I used to eat cherries straight from the bag without rinsing them. Then I started reading about how contaminated they can be. Now I always rinse them multiple times, and if I can, I buy them in season from a farmer's market. They're a bit pricier, but I like knowing where they come from." A horticulture professor I spoke with said that cherries have a delicate skin which pests can easily penetrate, making pesticide application a big part of commercial cherry production. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy cherries. It just means you want to be mindful about how you prepare them. Pears are another juicy favorite. They might not appear on every single EWG Dirty Dozen list, but they have popped up often enough to deserve a mention. Pears can host pesticide residues on their thin skin, especially if they're imported from regions with different regulations. If you're an apple or pear lover, you might face the same dilemma. Do you peel it and lose some of the nutrients, or do you risk ingesting the pesticides that can remain on the peel? A dietitian I spoke with recommends washing pears thoroughly with a produce brush if you plan to eat the skin, or opting for peeled pears if you suspect they might be heavily treated. Angie from New Jersey recalled discovering a slimy texture on the skin of some pears she bought at a chain grocery store. It was as if they had been coated in something waxy. It freaked me out, so I ended up cooking them. I figured that maybe cooking them would break down the residues, though I'm not sure if that's true. Now I'm more cautious about where I buy pears. Tomatoes might surprise some people because they're technically a fruit, though most folks treat them like a veggie. The trouble with tomatoes is they can be prone to various pests and diseases, so farmers often rely on pesticides, especially in large-scale tomato operations. The thin skin of many tomatoes means that if pesticides are sprayed, there's a decent chance some residue remains unless thoroughly cleaned or peeled. One laboratory test found that conventionally grown tomatoes sometimes tested positive for multiple residues. A friend of mine who worked in a grocery produce department said, "We'd get these tomatoes that had a really waxy, slick surface. When we washed them, the water would bead off in big drops. That can be normal for certain tomato varieties, but it can also be a sign of heavier wax or pesticide layering." Rita from Arizona mentioned, "We used to buy tomatoes at the supermarket, but now we mostly get them from our local farmer's market or grow them ourselves. The taste is so much better, and I don't feel as nervous about what might be on them." As with many other items, if you're going to eat a lot of tomatoes raw, such as in a salad, some experts say organic might be worth the investment. Celery is another unexpected contender. You might not think much about celery beyond using it as a base for soups or a crunchy snack with peanut butter. But it, too, has consistently appeared in the Dirty Dozen list. Celery has a high water content and no protective skin, which means it can readily absorb whatever's in the soil or sprayed onto the plant. According to some consumer group analyses, celery samples have shown residue from multiple pesticides, sometimes even more than one type on a single stalk. Olga from Georgia wrote in an online discussion forum, "I had a weird experience where I used celery in my green juice cleanse. I drank it every day for 2 weeks, and I started feeling nauseous and having headaches. Could have been a coincidence, but once I cut out the celery, I started feeling better. Now I try to buy organic celery, just in case." While no scientific study specifically proves celery was the direct cause of Olga's symptoms, it's an example of how some people who are sensitive might be affected by pesticide-laden produce. Bell peppers, especially sweet bell peppers, are beloved for adding color and crunch to salads, stir-fries, and fajitas. However, they're also frequently cited as having higher pesticide residues. The reason is that bell peppers are attractive to a variety of insects, which leads farmers to spray. The EWG has often included bell peppers, and sometimes hot peppers too, in its dirty dozen or near it. The thin, edible skin doesn't offer much protection. Deborah from Illinois mentioned a scenario where she found small holes in her store-bought peppers. It looked like some bug had gotten in. I realized that if a bug found its way inside, the farmer must have been using pesticides to prevent more widespread infestation. But it apparently didn't deter that bug, so I got the worst of both worlds, a bug plus chemicals. While that's anecdotal, it goes to show that even with pesticide use, produce can still have unwanted critters or contamination. Experts like dietitians and food safety specialists usually recommend thoroughly washing and, in some cases, peeling peppers, though peeling peppers is tricky and can remove some nutrients. Finally, potatoes often appear on the list of heavily sprayed crops. While potatoes have a thicker skin than something like strawberries, that skin is often eaten when the potatoes are baked or roasted. Potatoes can be subjected to pesticides, herbicides, to kill off weeds, and fungicides, to prevent rot. One of the bigger concerns is that some farmers use chemicals to extend shelf life and prevent sprouting. According to the USDA Pesticide Data Program, potatoes can show residues of fungicides and other compounds even after washing. A chef I know from Idaho said, "We get a lot of potatoes from local farms, and they're usually good quality, but I've seen shipments from mass producers that have a strong chemical smell when you open the bag. I always recommend peeling those." Several home cooks have noticed that when they rinse certain potatoes, the water can have a slight foamy quality. Some suspect it's a natural starch foam, while others think it could be chemical residue. Either way, if you notice something off with your potatoes, it might be wise to peel them or even switch to organic. Those are the top suspects: fruits and vegetables that often contain elevated levels of pesticides or other agricultural chemicals, according to the EWG and other consumer advocacy groups. Now, let's circle back to the bigger picture. Are these foods dangerous? Not necessarily. The FDA sets tolerance levels for each pesticide, and conventionally grown produce usually falls within those limits. However, many health experts argue that those limits might not account for the long-term cumulative effects of exposure or the combined effect of multiple pesticide residues on a single food item. It's a debate that won't be settled anytime soon. If you're concerned about pesticide exposure, you have a couple of options. One is to buy organic whenever feasible, especially for items on the high-risk list. Another is to thoroughly wash and, if appropriate, peel your produce. Washing in plain water for at least 30 seconds or using a vinegar rinse can significantly reduce surface residues, though it may not remove all chemicals that have seeped into the fruit or vegetable. You can also consider buying from local farmers you trust. Many small local farms practice pesticide-free or low-pesticide farming methods, even if they aren't certified organic. The certification process can be expensive and complicated. I want to highlight one more thing. Not all produce is equally contaminated. Some items consistently rank low in pesticide residues, often referred to as the Clean 15, which might include avocados, sweet corn, pineapple, onions, and so on. If you can't afford organic across the board, you can at least prioritize going organic for the foods most likely to have pesticide residues and go conventional for items that historically test clean. At the end of the day, it's about balance. Fruits and vegetables are critical components of a healthy diet. The last thing I want to do is scare you away from them entirely. More often than not, the health benefits of eating these foods, vitamins, minerals, fiber, antioxidants, outweigh the risks. But if you're someone who's particularly cautious or has certain health vulnerabilities, it doesn't hurt to pay extra attention to these lists. Some people like to keep an updated version of the EWG Dirty Dozen on their phone and refer to it when shopping. Others prefer to wash meticulously and just not stress too much. In the US, different grocery stores might have varying standards. Some carry a decent selection of organic produce, while others might have limited options. If you're shopping at a store known for discounts or bulk buys, it might be challenging to find organic or local produce. In such cases, thoroughly washing and peeling, where it makes sense, is your next best bet. Meanwhile, if your budget allows, higher-end stores often pride themselves on organic sections, local partnerships, or at least clearer labeling about pesticide use and farming practices. If you've had a negative experience, say you purchased a batch of strawberries that smelled off, or your spinach had a weird residue, don't hesitate to call or email the store's customer service. Some grocery chains take these complaints seriously, logging them so they can identify quality control issues. The brand or the farm might investigate, and in some cases, there might be a recall if enough complaints surface. Consumer advocacy is powerful, and your voice counts. By now, you're probably thinking, that was a lot to digest, and you're right. Food safety and pesticide contamination are not simple black and white topics. With the complexity of modern agriculture, regulatory frameworks, and varying levels of consumer awareness, it can be confusing. But knowledge is power, and it can help you make informed decisions that align with your health goals, ethical views, and budget. Moving forward, keep an eye on annual reports, such as the EWG's Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, and stay tuned to updates from the USDA and FDA. If you love these fruits and vegetables and don't want to give them up, try thoroughly washing them or removing their skins if that's an option. And if you can support local farms and markets that use fewer chemicals or follow organic practices. At the end of the day, it's all about enjoying these delicious foods while minimizing the potential risks.